Wonder of the World! Fairburn's account of the Mermaid, the most extraordinary animal in the creation, half woman and half fish, forming the connecting link in the chain of nature between the human and Piscine tribes. Illustrated with 2 engravings, drawn from accurate inspection of the animal, with permission of the proprietor, by Mr. Cruikshank. London. Printed and published by John Fairburn, Broadway, Ludgate Hill. The Mermaid, etc., etc. Notwithstanding the many accounts, or rather hints, which have been handed down from very remote antiquity of this human Piscine animal, they have been so clogged with fiction that they have ever been ranked as of fabulous origin. The classical scholar will remember with pleasure those stories told in the most elegant language, which amused and instructed his youthful days. And he will now feel not a little surprised that those things which he deemed to be only the elegancies of fiction are likely to turn out something like realities. And that, to add to the wonders of the creation, there really seems to exist a very near link between the human and the Piscine tribes, as strongly defined as that between the human and brute creation, by means of the Simae, or apes. Brief recapitulation of the ideas of the ancients, as well as of the more modern accounts of natural historians, travelers, and voyagers, respecting the merman race, will not be, it is presumed, unentertaining to the learned, or uninstructive to the unlearned world. The sirens in fabulous history were certain celebrated songstresses, who were ranked among the demigods of antiquity. Hyginus places their birth among the consequences of the rape of Proserpine. Others make them the daughters of the river Aeolus and one of the Muses. The number of the sirens was 3, and their names were Parthenope, Ligeia, and Leucosia. Some make them half women and half fish, others half women and half birds. There are antique representations of them still subsisting under both these forms. Pausanias tells us that the sirens, by the persuasion of Juno, challenged the Muses to a trial of skill in singing, and these, having vanquished them, plucked the golden feathers from the wings of the sirens, and formed them into crowns, with which they adorned their own heads. The Argonauts are said to have been diverted from the enchantment of their songs by the superior strains of Orpheus. Ulysses, however, had great difficulty in securing himself from seduction. See Odyssey, Book 12. To a modern reader. Pope, in his notes to the 12th book of the Odyssey, observes that the critics have greatly labored to explain what was the foundation of this fiction of the sirens. We are told by some that the sirens were queens of certain small islands, called Cyrenussae, that lie near Capri in Italy, and chiefly inhabited the promontory of Minerva, upon the top of which that goddess had a temple, as some affirm, built by Ulysses. Here there was a renowned academy in the reign of the sirens, famous for eloquence and the liberal sciences, which gave occasion to the invention of the fable of the sweetness of the voice and attracting songs of the sirens. But why then are they fabled to be destroyers, and painted in such dreadful colors? We are told that at last the students abused their knowledge to the coloring of wrong, the corruption of manners, and the subversion of government. That is, in the language of poetry, they were feigned to be transformed into monsters, and with their music to have enticed passengers to their ruin, who there consumed their patrimonies, and poisoned their virtues with riot and effeminacy. The place is now called Massa. Some writers tell us of a certain bay, contracted within winding straits and broken cliffs, which, by the singing of the winds and the beating of the waters, returns a delightful harmony that allures the passenger to approach, who is immediately thrown against the rocks and swallowed up by the violent eddies. Thus Horace, moralizing, calls idleness a siren. Vitanda est improba siren, desidia. But the fable may be applied to all pleasures in general, which, if too eagerly pursued, betray the incautious into ruin, while wise men, like Ulysses, stop their ears against their insinuations. But the fable may be applied to all pleasures in general, which, if too eagerly pursued, betray the incautious into ruin, while wise men, like Ulysses, stop their ears against their insinuations. The learned Mr. Bryant says that the sirens were Cuthite and Canaanitish priests who had founded temples in Sicily, which were rendered infamous on account of the women who officiated. They were much addicted to cruel rites, so that the shores upon which they resided are described as covered with the bones of men destroyed by their artifice. Virgil, Aeneid. Book 5, verse 864. All ancient writers agree in telling us that sirens inhabited the coasts of Sicily. The name, according to Bochart, who derives it from the Phoenician language, implies a songstress. Hence it is probable, says Dr. Burney, that in ancient times there may have been excellent singers, but of corrupt morals, on the coast of Sicily, who, by seducing voyagers, gave rise to this fable. And if this conjecture be well founded, he observes, the Muses are not the only pagan divinities who preserve their influence over mankind in modern times. For every age has its sirens, and every siren her votaries. When beauty and talents, both powerful in themselves, are united, they become still more attractive. Such is the substance of the accounts derived from antiquity of the sirens, which, however clouded by fiction, evidently prove that the most learned of the ancients had heard of, and really believed in, the existence of animals half human and half Piscine, whose places of resort they have pointed out in the Mediterranean Sea. It should be observed that the ancient authors are not to be ranked as the romance writers of the present day, who coin monsters in order to display their powers of invention. The former always veiled some important truth or mystery under the most seemingly improbable stories, which could be only unriddled by the initiate, and were meant to be kept sacred from the vulgar. The Odi profanum vulgus et arcio of Horace seems to have been the maxim of all the learned men in all ages, and many of the important truths and facts, which were couched under allegory, or depicted by hieroglyphics, are now forever lost to the world, which, had the same liberal plan of communicating knowledge existed then, as at the present day had, perhaps added much to our general stock, and greatly increased our admiration of those sages of antiquity. Because there are no sirens of late years to be met with in the Mediterranean Sea, it should not be inferred that there never were any such. That sea was then never traversed but by barks on coasting voyages, and the monsters of the deep roamed undisturbed. The sea coasts themselves were barren, inhospitable wilds, where scarce human voice was heard, or the foot of man ever trod. Whether in the ocean or on land, we plainly perceive how all kinds of animals, save those which have been domesticated, fly from the destructive hand of man. The mammoth has disappeared from the wilds of America, and the hippopotamus from the shores of Egypt. Nay, the northern ocean, which was once covered with whales, is now but very scantily supplied, and none are now to be found of that prodigious bulk to which we have authentic accounts of their having formerly attained. The species is, in fact, evidently decreased. We now come to the more modern accounts, which, though divested of all ambiguity, and seemingly well attested and authenticated, have never been able to rescue the existence of these animals from its character of being the offspring of fiction and fable. In the year 1187, as Leray informs us, such a monster was fished up on the coast of Suffolk, and kept by the governor for 6 months. It bore so near a conformity with man that nothing seemed wanting to it but speech. One day it took the opportunity of making its escape, and plunging into the sea, was never more heard of. Histoire de l'Angleterre, Part 1, page 403. In the year 1430, after a huge tempest, which broke down the dikes in Holland and made way for the sea into the meadows, etc., some girls of the town of Edam, in West Friesland, going in a boat to milk their cows, perceived a mermaid embarrassed in the mud, with very little water. They took it into their boat, and brought it with them to Edam, dressed it in women's apparel, and taught it to spin. It fed like one of them, but could never be brought to offer at speech. Some time afterwards it was brought to Haarlem, where it lived for some years, though still showing an inclination to the water. Delice de Holland. Another creature of the same species was caught in the Baltic in 1531, and sent as a present to Sigismund, King of Poland, with whom it lived 3 days, and was seen by all the court. Another very young one was taken near Roca de Sintra, as related by Damian Goes. The King of Portugal and the Grand Master of the Order of St. James are said to have had a suit at law to determine which party these monsters belonged to. In the year 1560, near the island of Manar, on the western coast of Ceylon, some fishermen brought up at one draught of a net 7 mermen and mermaids, of which several Jesuits, and amongst the rest, Fathers Henry Henrique and Dimas Bosquet, physicians to the Viceroy of Goa, were witnesses. The physician, who examined them with a great deal of care, and made dissection thereof, asserts that all the parts, both external and internal, were found perfectly conformable to those of men. Histoire de la Compagnie de Jésus, Part 2, Volume 4, number 276. We have another account of a merman seen near the great rock called the Diamond, on the coast of Martinico. The persons who saw it gave a precise description of it before a notary. They affirmed that they saw it wipe its hand over its face, and even heard it blow its nose. In Pontoppidan's Natural History of Norway, also, we have accounts of mermaids, but not more remarkable or any way better attested than the above. More modern instances are the following. In 1613, a mermaid was taken in the harbour of Cherbourg after a violent storm, and was carried by the mayor of that place as a present to the French court, but, dying before it reached Versailles, it was afterwards shown publicly in the streets of Paris. In the year 1758, a mermaid was exhibited at the fair of Saint-Germain in France. It was about 2 feet long, very active, sporting about in the vessel of water in which it was kept with great agility and seeming delight. It was fed with bread and small fish. Its position, when at rest, was always erect. It was a female with ugly features. The skin was harsh, the ears very large, and the back parts and tail were covered with scales. Monsieur Gaultier, a celebrated French artist, made an exact drawing of it. Another mermaid, which was exhibited in London in 1775, was said to have been taken in the Gulf of Stancio, in the archipelago or Aegean Sea, by a merchantman trading to Natolia in August 1774. It was therefore an Asiatic mermaid. The description is as follows. Its face is like that of a young female, its eyes a fine light blue, its nose small and handsome, its mouth small, its lips thin, and the edges of them round like that of the codfish. Its teeth are small, regular, and white, its chin well-shaped, and its neck full. Its ears are like those of the eel, but placed like those of the human species, and behind them are the gills for respiration, which appear like curls. Some are said to have hair upon their head, but this has only rolls instead of hair, which at a distance might be taken for short curls. But its chief ornament is a beautiful membrane or fin rising from the temples, and gradually diminishing till it ends pyramidically, forming a foretop like a lady's headdress. It has no fin on the back, but a bone like that of the human species. Its breasts are fair and full. The arms and hands are well proportioned, but without nails on the fingers. The belly is round and swelling, but there is no navel. From the waist downwards the body is in all respects like the codfish. It has 3 sets of fins, one above another, below the waist, which enable it to swim erect on the sea. In the year 1794, a mermaid, as it was called, was shown at No. 7, New Broad Court, Bow Street, Covent Garden, and said to have been taken in the North Seas by Captain Fortier. This nymph of the sea, a woman from the head down to the lower part of the waist, and a fish from thence downwards, was 3 feet long, having ears, gills, breasts, fins, shoulders, arms, hands, fingers, and a contiguous scale covering the fish part. The next publication of credit, in which we find a notice relative to the mermaid, is Dr. Chisholm's Essay on the Malignant Fever of the West Indies, published in 1801. The doctor speaks of it as follows. I probably hazard the implication of credulity by the following note. In the year 1797, happening to be at Governor Van Battenberg's plantation in Berbice, the conversation turned on a singular animal which had been repeatedly seen in Berbice River, and some smaller rivers, such particularly as Mahesone and Abery on the same coast. So many circumstances relative to this animal were detailed by Mr. Van Battenberg, as removed much of the disinclination to belief I felt. The animal is the famous mermaid, hitherto considered as a mere creature of the imagination. It is called by the Indians Menemama, or Mother of the Waters. The description given of it by the governor is as follows. The upper portion resembles the human figure, the head smaller in proportion, sometimes bare, but oftener covered with a copious quantity of long black hair. The shoulders are broad, and the breast large and well formed. The lower portion resembles the tail portion of a fish, is of immense dimension, the tail forked, and not unlike that of the dolphin, as it is usually represented. The color of the skin is either black or tawny. The animal is held in veneration and dread by the Indians, who imagine that the killing it would be attended with the most calamitous consequences. It is from this circumstance that none of these animals have been shot, and consequently not examined but at a distance. They have been generally observed in a sitting posture in the water, none of the lower extremity being discovered until they are disturbed, when, by plunging, the tail appears, and agitates the water to a considerable distance round. They have been always seen employed in smoothing their hair, or stroking their faces and breasts with their hands, or something resembling hands. In this posture, and thus employed, they have been frequently taken for Indian women bathing. Mr. Van Battenberg's account was much corroborated by that of some gentlemen settled in Mahesone and Abery. Captain Stedman, in his narrative of the expedition against the revolted Negroes of Suriname from 1772 to 1777, Volume 2, page 176, maintains that the animal called a mermaid is really and truly a viviporous fish, the female of which is furnished with breasts, that the appearance of hair is a deception proceeding from a fin running down the back, of a curious construction, that the hands are fleshy fins, etc. But it is to be observed that he drew his information from old Negroes and Indians, whose remarks, we may suppose, were not very accurate, especially as they were, whilst looking at the animal, under the influence of dread. The reader may compare this with Lord Monboddo's curious relations, and believe as much as he chooses of it. As what I have said comes from very respectable authority, I thought it meriting attention. At Sandside, in the parish of Ray, in the county of Caithness, there was seen, on the 12th of January 1809, an animal supposed to be the mermaid. The head and the chest, being all that was visible, exactly resembled those of a full-grown young woman. The breasts were perfectly formed, the arms longer than in the human body, and the eyes somewhat smaller. When the waves dashed the hair, which was of a sea-green shade, over the face, the hands were immediately employed to replace it. The skin was of a pink color. Though observed by several persons within the distance of 20 yards, for about an hour and a half, it discovered no symptoms of alarm. It was seen by 4 or 5 individuals of unquestionable veracity at the same time. Something of the same kind was observed in the same neighborhood about 7 or 8 years before, by a gentleman then residing near the spot. A young man named John MacIsaac of Corfine in Kintyre in Scotland made oath on examination at Campbelltown before the sheriff substitute of Kintyre that he saw on the afternoon of the 13th of October 1811 on a black rock on the sea-coast an animal, of the particulars of which he gives a long and curious detail, answering in general to the description commonly given of the mermaid. He states that the upper half of it was white, and of the shape of a human body, the other half, towards the tail, of a brindled or reddish-grey colour, apparently covered with scales, but the extremity of the tail itself was of a greenish-red, shining colour, that the head was covered with long hair. At times it would put back the hair on both sides of its head. It would also spread its tail like a fan, and while so extended, the tail continued in tremulous motion, and when drawn together again, it remained motionless, and appeared to the deponent to be about 12 or 14 inches broad, that the hair was long and light brown, that the animal was between 4 and 5 feet long, that it had a head, hair, arms, and body, down to the middle, like a human being, that the arms were short in proportion to the body, which appeared to be about the thickness of that of a young lad, and tapering gradually to the point of the tail, that when stroking its head, as above mentioned, the fingers were kept close together, so that he cannot say whether they were webbed or not, that he saw it for near 2 hours, the rock on which it lay being dry, that, after the sea had so far retired as to leave the rock dry to the height of 5 feet above the water, it tumbled clumsily into the sea. A minute after, he observed the animal above water, and then he saw every feature of its face, having all the appearance of a human being, with very hollow eyes. The cheeks were of the same colour with the rest of the face. The neck seemed short, and it was constantly, with both hands, stroking and washing its breast, which was half immersed in the water. He therefore cannot say whether its bosom was formed like a woman's or not. He saw no other fins or feet upon it, but as described. It continued above water for a few minutes, and then disappeared. He was informed that some boys in a neighbouring farm saw a similar creature in the sea, close to the shore, on the same day. The minister of Campbelltown and the chamberlain of Mull attest his examination, and declare they know no reason why his veracity should be questioned. Mr. Topin, of Exmouth, published the following account of his having seen a mermaid, in the local London newspapers. The day, August 11th, 1812, being very fine, I joined a party of ladies and gentlemen in a sailing excursion. When we had got about a mile to the southeast of Exmouth Bar, our attention was suddenly arrested by a very singular noise, by no means unpleasant to the ear, but of which it is impossible to give a correct idea by mere description. It was not, however, unaptly compared by one of our ladies to the wild melodies of the Aeolian harp, combined with a noise similar to that made by a stream of water falling gently on the leaves of a tree. In the meantime we observed something about 100 yards from us, to windward. We all imagined it to be some human being, though at the same time we were at a loss to account for this, at such a distance from the shore, and no other boat near. We hailed, but received no reply, and we made toward this creature as soon as possible, when, to the great astonishment of us all, it eluded our pursuit by plunging under water. In a few minutes it rose again, nearly in the same place, and by that time we had got sufficiently near for one of the boatmen to throw into the water a piece of boiled fish, which he had in his locker. This seemed to alarm the animal, though it soon recovered from its fears, for we presently observed it to lay hold of the fish, which it ate with apparent relish. Several other pieces were thrown out, by which the creature was induced to keep at a short distance from our boat, and afforded us the opportunity of observing it with attention, and found, to our astonishment, that it was no other than a mermaid. As the sea was calm and in a great degree transparent, every part of the animal's body became in turn visible. The head, from the crown to the chin, forms rather a long oval, and the face seems to resemble that of the seal, though at the same time it is far more agreeable, possessing a peculiar softness, which renders the whole set of features very interesting. The upper and back part of the head appeared to be furnished with something like hair, and the fore part of the body with something like down, between a very light fawn and a very pale pink color, which at a distance had the appearance of flesh, and may have given rise to the idea that the body of the mermaid is externally like that of the human being. This creature has 2 arms, each of which terminates into a hand with 4 fingers, connected to each other by means of a very thin elastic membrane. The animal used its arms with great agility, and its motions in general were very graceful. From the waist it gradually tapered, so as to form a tail, which had the appearance of being covered with strong, broad, polished scales, which occasionally reflected the rays of the sun in a very beautiful manner. And from the back and upper part of the neck, down to the loins, the body also appeared covered with short, round, broad feathers, of the color of the down on the fore part of the body. The whole length of the animal, from the crown of the head to the extremity of the tail, was supposed to be about 5 feet, or 5 feet and a half. In about 10 minutes, from the time we approached, the animal gave 2 or 3 plunges in quick succession, as if it were at play. After this it gave a sudden spring and swam away from us very rapidly, and in a few seconds we lost sight of it. Mermaids, of course, do not always continue maids, and accordingly we are informed that 2 mer-children were lately discovered by 3 respectable tradesmen of Douglas, Isle of Man, during an excursion on the Calf of Man, in quest of seafowl. Attracted by a sound somewhat resembling the cries of a young kitten, they found, on searching amongst the rocks, 2 small marine animals, exactly resembling in their form that species of a creature so often described and known by the name of the mermaid. One of them was dead, and much ulcerated by the violence with which it had been driven on shore during a violent gale of wind on the preceding night. The other was, however, conveyed to Douglas, where it was living when this account was sent. It was 1 foot 11 inches and 3/4 in length, from the crown of the head to the extremity of the tail, 5 inches across the shoulders. Its skin was of a very pale brown color, and the scales on the tail tinged with violet. The hair, if it may be so called, was of a light green cast, attached to the crown of the head, only hanging loose about the face. About 4 inches in length, very gelatinous to the touch, and somewhat resembling the green seaweed commonly growing on rocks. Its mouth was small and has no appearance of teeth. It delighted much in swimming about in a large tub of sea-water, and fed chiefly on mussels and other shellfish. It would also now and then swallow small portions of milk and water, when given to it in a quill. In addition to these authorities, a gentleman of unquestionable veracity assures me that about 7 or 8 years ago he saw 2 young mermaids, a male and a female, alive, which were caught by a person near Worthing, having been washed ashore by a tremendous storm. They were about 2 feet long. The breasts of the female were prominent, their hair somewhat resembling seaweed, and in ringlets, which falling over their eyes when they plunged under water, they would, immediately on coming up to the surface again, put back with their fingers, in the same manner as our modern dandies accommodate their Brutus foretops. They were kept in a large tub of sea-water, resembling a brewer's mash-tub, where they were exhibited to numbers of people, being fed on small fishes, which would occasion a contest between them for the largest share, the male having no notion of politeness for his fair companion. They made a noise somewhat similar to the cry of a young child. If required, the gentleman offered to make affidavit of the above fact. In this doubtful state was the literary and scientific part of the world kept on a point so interesting in natural philosophy, when the question seemed to be very likely to be brought forward in somewhat like a tangible shape. The important announcement was first made to the public through the medium of Bell's Weekly Messenger of the 21st July, 1822, as follows. A mermaid, to the editor of Bell's Weekly Messenger. London Missionary Society's Rooms, 8, Old Jewry, July 18. Sir, I enclose you a copy of an extract of a letter we have received from our Society's representative at the Cape of Good Hope, for insertion in your paper. I am, sir, your most obedient servant, G. Hodson, Assistant Secretary. Extract of a letter from the Reverend Dr. Philip, representative of the London Missionary Society, at Cape Town, Cape of Good Hope, dated April 26th, 1822. I have today seen a mermaid, now exhibiting in this town. I have always treated the existence of this creature as fabulous, but my skepticism is now removed. As it is probable no description of this extraordinary creature has yet reached England, the following particulars respecting it may gratify your curiosity and amuse you. The head is almost the size of that of a baboon. It is thinly covered with black hair, hanging down and not inclined to frizzle. On the upper lip and on the chin there are a few hairs resembling those upon the head. The ossa malarum, or cheekbones, are prominent. The forehead is low, but, except in this particular, the features are much better proportioned, and bear a more decided resemblance to the human countenance than those of any of the baboon tribes. The head is turned back, and the countenance has an expression of terror, which gives it an appearance of a caricature of the human face. But I am disposed to think that both these circumstances are accidental, and have arisen from the manner in which the creature met its death. It bears the appearance of having died in great agony. The ears, nose, lips, chin, breasts, and nipples, fingers and nails, resemble those of a human figure. The spinous processes of the vertebrae are very prominent, and apparently arranged as in the human body. From the position of the arms, and the manner in which they are placed, and from such an examination as could be made in the circumstances in which I was placed at the time I saw it, I can have no doubt that it has clavicles, an appendage belonging to the human subject, which baboons are without. The appearance of the teeth affords sufficient evidence that it is full grown, the incisors being worn on the upper surface. There are 8 incisors, 4 canine, and 8 molars. The canine teeth resemble those of a full-grown dog. All the others resemble those of a human subject. The length of the animal is 3 feet, but not having been well preserved, it has shrunk considerably, and must have been longer, and must have both longer and thicker when alive than it is now. Its resemblance to the human species ceases immediately under the mammae. On the line of separation and directly under the breasts are 2 fins. From the point where the human figure ceases, which is about 12 inches below the vertex of the head, it resembles a large fish of the salmon species. It is covered with scales all over. On the lower part of the animal, the scales resemble those of a fish, but on that part of the animal which resembles the human form, they are much less, and scarcely perceptible except on a near inspection. On the lower part of the body it has 6 fins, 1 dorsal, 2 ventral, 2 pectoral, and the tail. The pectoral fins are very remarkable. They are horizontal, and evidently formed as an apparatus to support the creature when in an erect position. When in an erect posture, like that in which it has been sometimes represented, combing its hair. The figure of the tail is exactly that which is given in the usual representations of the mermaid. The proprietor of this extraordinary animal is Captain Eads of Boston, in the United States of America. Since writing the above description, he has called upon me, and I have learned from him the following particulars. It was caught somewhere on the north of China by a fisherman, who sold it for a trifle, after which it was brought to Batavia. Here it was purchased by Captain Eads for 5,000 Spanish dollars, and he has since been offered 10,000 Spanish dollars for it, but refuses to part with it for that sum. Captain Eads is a passenger on board the ship Lion, now in Table Bay. He leaves this port in about a fortnight, and the Lion visits the Thames on her passage to America, so that it, the Mermaid, will probably be soon exhibited in London. The newspapers having thus announced that an animal of this sort has been brought to the Cape of Good Hope by an American, who had purchased it on the coast of China, I must confess my incredulity, being suspicious from experience, as well as many others, of everything coming from an American quarter. Such also was the case with the landlord of the Bush Tavern at Bristol, who, hearing an American assert the reality of these animals, said, "No doubt of it, sir. Captain told me that as his vessel lay at anchor on Sunday, a merman appeared with his head frizzed and powdered like a cauliflower, and desired to speak to the captain. 'Sir,' said he, 'have the goodness to order your anchor to be weighed, as it lies precisely against my street door, and prevents my family from going to church.'" The arrival of this animal and its intended exhibition at 39 St. James Street was no sooner announced than I resolved to gratify my curiosity by seeing another loose fish added to the shoals which already are too numerous in London, and to retain my skepticism, or satisfy myself of the reality, by as accurate an inspection as would be permitted me to take of it. The exhibitant, I thought, if a man of liberal principles, will court the most accurate investigation of one of the greatest wonders of nature, the connecting link between the human and the Piscine tribe. I therefore entered the room prepared against being imposed upon by a factitious compound, a manufacture of American ingenuity, of which I had seen many instances during my residence in that country. The announcement that $10,000 had been offered and refused for the creature at the Cape of Good Hope greatly increased my suspicions as a kind of puff direct. Even allowing, what there seems no reason to doubt, that the proprietor is a gentleman of the strictest sense of honor, who would revolt at the idea of an imposition on a generous people, still, it is well known that the Chinese, from whom the animal was first purchased, are a set of the most arrant cheats, and so dexterous at putting off their impostures on foreigners, that there is scarcely a vessel that touches in their harbours, whose crew has not experienced some specimens of their ingenuity, so that if there should be any trick in the business, it is to them that suspicion would rather attach, than to a native of a free and enlightened country. The animal is placed in an upright position for the upper 2/3 of its length. when it is bent and the tail turned up. The left hand is placed against the head, and the right arm is bent so that the hand comes just under the jawbone. This position of the hands, if not artificial, and the expression of the face betoken, as Dr. Philip observes, that it died in great agony, or rather terror. The whole of the doctor's description is so very precise and accurate as to need very little addition. Indeed, it should seem that he examined the subject more minutely than any person has now the opportunity of doing, it being covered by a glass case which permits inspection, but not handling. I looked most attentively to that part where the junction of the two natures took place, but could not discern anything like a seam or suture to justify suspicion. If it be an imposture, it is decidedly one of the very first order. For ingenuity, but to remove every shadow of doubt, the exhibitant informed the company then present that, beside Dr. Philip at the Cape of Good Hope, the animal had been investigated by Sir Everard Home, whose skill no man in London would feel inclined to call in question. It must be granted that the inspection allowed is liberal, and the subject advantageously displayed. But something more seems to be wanting to set beyond all manner of doubt a question which all the scientific part of mankind, up to the present day, have treated as chimerical. The body of a baboon may be so exactly conjoined to the part of a fish, and the parts so glued together, and covered with scales, as to deceive the sight and even the feeling. I hope I should not be suspected of throwing out a hint of this kind to spoil the speculation of the proprietor, who has, as he asserts, been at a great expense, and highly merits a remuneration, which he will undoubtedly meet with from the British public. Indeed, the exhibitant told us that the receipts on Friday, October 18th, amounted to £25 for that day, at only 1 shilling per head. But the credulity and fondness of John Bull for raree shows, which has been noted by our immortal bard Shakespeare in The Tempest, still hangs by him, and is so much ridiculed by foreigners of all countries, that I should be sorry to give them occasion for another grin at our expense. I only throw out a suggestion, therefore, that men of more skill in physiology, and of more influence, may fully investigate the business before we wholly resign our other senses to the evidence of our eyes. If the reality of the creature should, after accurate investigation, be fully substantiated, we can only say that there is one more species added to the genus of loose fish. And if the accounts above given, of its having been caught and kept alive, and even received some degree of education, be verified, the present or some future generation may hope to be gratified with an aquatic exhibition at our theatres, in which some of these animals, in a living state, may be presented playing up their gambols and frisking about in their native element. Nay, if the ancient accounts of their vocal abilities turn out to be accurate, the ocean may furnish us with a Catalani or a Brahmin, who may chant the wonders of the deep, and expose to us a scene of existence of which we have at present no idea. Some future Byron may record in flowing strains the intrigues of some Don Juan of the deep, and a Scot sing the amours of some lady of the sea. As a new species of animals has been added to our stock of natural history, so a new species of poetry may inflame the ardour of our poets in embryo. One circumstance ought not, in justice, to be omitted, as it appears to betoken a degree of liberality in the proprietor, which is, that the price of admission on the first exhibition of so extraordinary a creature is fixed so low as 1 shilling per head, which will not debar persons of any, even the lowest rank of life, from gratifying their curiosity. This is as it should be. This is a great accommodation to the public, that the proprietor of the Mermaid has selected a situation so peculiarly adapted to the exhibition as the Turf Coffee House in St. James's Street. It is one of the finest situations in London, The proprietor, Mr. Watson, who is a young man of great respectability and very conversant in life, knows well how to entertain his numerous visitants, who, we can speak from authority, may be accommodated with good dinners, and excellent wines, chocolate, soups, breakfasts, well-aired beds, etc., 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 on reasonable terms, with the use of a pleasant coffee-room, and other apartments elegantly fitted up, expressly for the convenience of gentlemen. The end. Finis.